Now, the reason I'm sharing this book with you is because it's another point of view from inside the group of men and women who practiced these things that Carlos Castaneda practiced and wrote about. And each time I read a book from someone within this group, I gain a new perspective on, say, recapitulation or turning off the world. You get to hear it from another point of view. And so I'm going to share with you another point of view. If you're not familiar with how I do this, I will read a chapter and pick an idea or a practice within it, and I will practice it, and then I'll share that experience with you. Just like you, I am a student. I'm no master. I'm just a guy out here sharing things that I found and talking about my experiences within them. I'm encouraging you to try some of these experiments and to take note. Comment below. Encounters with the Nagual. Conversations with Carlos Castaneda. First Light Press, first edition, November 2004. First published in Spanish, November 2002. Cover design is by Luis Salgado. Preface. I first got to know Armando when we met by chance in a place of power in the mountains of central Mexico. We felt an immediate, spontaneous friendship between us, and the subject of the conversation which ensued inspired me to tell him that I had had the privilege of knowing Carlos Castaneda. Armando told me that he also knew him and that he had written a book about his teachings. I became very curious and asked him to tell me more about it. He seemed uninterested, saying that this was not the appropriate time. I didn't insist, since I was just getting to know him. In the course of many years of friendship, he mentioned the topic a few times, but always in reference to some other subject we were discussing. Even when I had made friends with those who walk over there, it is only now that I have access to his work. When I read the manuscript for the first time, I became profoundly excited, since it allowed me to comprehend one of the most obscure premises in Carlos's teaching, what he called the portion of the rule for the three-pronged Nagual, a project for the renewal of the lineages of knowledge on a global scale. He assured me that Carlos had ordered him to make this information known and asked me to support him in the execution of this task. However, since the manuscript was quite short, some 30 pages, I suggested that he supplement it with a description of some of the numerous lectures by Carlos Castaneda which Armando had attended. Agreeing to my proposal, he selected a selection of teachings which Carlos had presented, either in public lectures or in private conversations. To make them easier to read, he grouped them according to content rather than putting them in chronological order. In some instances, he also had to reconstruct the conversations. Carlos had an extremely emphatic way of speaking and transmitted much of the information through gestures and facial expressions, and enjoyed mixing personal stories and all manner of observations with his teachings. As an extraordinary gift, at the end of the book, Armando added a brief account of his own experience with another group of sorcery practitioners. Due to the simplicity and sincerity of its narrative, this book has a power that I have not found in any other work related to the subject. For that reason, it is a great pleasure for me to be able to help Armando in the task of publishing it. I am certain that it will be highly appreciated by all those who love the work of Carlos Castaneda. Juan Yolilisli. Introduction. My name is Armando Torres. I have written this book in order to complete a task that was assigned to me years ago. In October 1984, I met Carlos Castaneda, a controversial anthropologist and a writer on the subject of sorcery. At the time, I was still quite young. In my quest for answers, I had looked into various spiritual traditions, and I wanted to find a teacher. But from the very beginning, Carlos was clear in this respect. I don't promise anything, he said. I am not a guru. Freedom is an individual choice, and each one of us must assume the responsibility of fighting for it. In one of the first talks that I attended, he severely criticized the kind of human idolatry that induces us to follow others and to expect ready-made answers from them. He said that this attitude is a remnant of our herd mentality. Whoever sincerely wants to penetrate the teachings of sorcerers does not need guides. It is sufficient to have a genuine interest and guts of steel. He will, by himself, find everything he needs through an unbending intent. It was on these premises that our relationship evolved. Therefore, I want to state very clearly that I am not Carlos's apprentice in any formal sense of the word. All I did was talk with him from time to time. Yet that was enough to convince me that the true path consists of our determination to be impeccable. The main motivation for publishing some of the experiences I had by his side is gratitude. Carlos was magnificent with everyone who had the good fortune of knowing him, since it is the nature of a Nagual to bestow gifts of power. To be near him was to receive an abundance of inspiration and a wealth of stories, advice, and teachings of all kinds. It would be selfish, then, for one who has. In my dealings with him and with other men of knowledge, I witnessed events that from a rational point of view could only be called extraordinary. For sorcerers, however, things like remote vision, knowledge of events before they happen, or journeying to parallel worlds are normal experiences in the execution of their tasks. As long as we are incapable of verifying them for ourselves, we will inevitably take them to be fantasies, or at best, to be metaphors. This is the nature of sorcerer's knowledge, take it or leave it. You cannot reason it out. It is not possible to verify it intellectually. The only thing we can do with it is to put it into practice, exploring the extraordinary possibilities within our being. Armando Torres. Part 1. A Romance with Knowledge. The Sorcerers Revolution. We had gathered on the second floor of an elegant house in order to listen to a famous lecturer. We were a group of 12 people. I knew none of them except the friend who had invited me. While we waited, we were chatting amicably among ourselves. Nearly 2 hours passed, and our guest had not yet arrived. People's faces began to show signs of fatigue. Some despaired and left. At a certain moment, I had the impulse to lean out of a window. I saw him arrive, and our eyes met. Unexpectedly, a strong wind came into the room, making papers fly everywhere as Carlos walked in. Some of the people were still struggling to close the windows. His appearance was different from what I had expected. He was short but solid, with a grayish hair and dark skin which had begun to furrow with wrinkles. He was dressed in an informal way which made him look 10 years younger. His face, funny and full of life, radiated sympathy. He seemed very happy to be with us, and it was a true pleasure to be near him. He greeted each of us with a handshake and said we had to use our time well because he was expected somewhere else later that night. Then he made himself comfortable in an armchair and asked, "What do you want to talk about?" But before we had time to answer him, he took the initiative and flooded us with stories. His conversation was direct and absorbing, sprinkled with jokes that he finished off with expressive gestures. During this talk, he referred to Nagualism as a body of practices and ideas talked about its historical development, and maintained that modern man has been granted an incredible opportunity through the revelations of the sorcerers. Later, he spoke of a complex maneuver of awareness to which seers devote themselves, the movement of the assemblage point. This topic was quite new to me, so I limited myself to listen and take notes. Fortunately, Carlos had a habit of repeating the main ideas, and this made it easy for me to follow him. Towards the end, he agreed to answer some questions. One of the people present wanted to know what the sorcerer's view on war was. Carlos looked annoyed. "What do you want me to say?" he asked. "They're pacifists? Well, they are not. Our destiny as ordinary men doesn't concern them at all. You should understand this once and for all. A warrior is made for combat. When he is at war, he is comfortable." Judging from his reaction, it seemed that the question had touched a sensitive spot. He took his time, explaining that unlike the petty wars which we as humans constantly involve ourselves in because of social, religious, or economic reasons, the war of sorcerers is not directed against other people, but against their own weaknesses. By the same token, their peace is not the submissive condition to which modern man has been reduced. Rather, it is an imperturbable state of internal silence and discipline. Passivity, he said, is a violation of our nature, because in essence, we are formidable combatants. Every human being is by right a soldier who has achieved his place in the world in a battle of life and death. Look at it this way. At least once, as sperms, each one of us fought a battle for life, a unique struggle against millions of other competitors, and we won. And now that battle continues since we are trapped by the forces of this world. One part of us is fighting to disintegrate and die, while another tries to maintain life and awareness at any cost. There is no peace. A warrior realizes this and uses it to his advantage. His goal continues to be that which inspires the spark of life that created him, access to a new level of awareness. He continued by saying that as we become socialized, human beings are tamed, just like an animal is domesticated, by the power of stimuli and punishments. We have been trained to live and die meekly, following unnatural codes of behavior which soften us and make us lose that initial impulse until our spirit is hardly noticeable. We are born as a result of a fight. By denying our basic tendencies, the society we live in eradicates the warring heritage that transforms us into magical beings. He added that the only available way to change is to accept ourselves just as we are and work from there. The warrior knows that he lives in a predatory universe. He can never let his guard down. Wherever he looks, he sees an incessant fight, and he knows that it deserves his respect because it is a fight to the death. Don Juan was always moving, coming or going, supporting this or rejecting that, provoking tensions or discharging them in a burst, shouting his intent or remaining silent, doing something. He was alive, and his life reflected the ebb and flow of the universe. He told me that from the moment when the explosion which gave us origin occurred until the moment of our death, we live within a flow. Those two episodes are unique because they prepare us for the encounter of what lies further ahead and what aligns us with that flow. An incessant battle which only a warrior will attempt. Because of that, he lives in profound harmony with everything. For a warrior, to be harmonious is to flow, not to step in the middle of the current and try to make a space of artificial and impossible peace. He knows that he can only give the very best of himself under conditions of maximum tension. For that reason, he seeks out his opponent the way a fighting rooster does, with avidity, with delight, knowing that the next step is decisive. His opponent is not his fellow man, but his own attachments and weaknesses, and his grand challenge is to compress the layers of his energy until they won't expand when his life ceases, so that his awareness does not die. Ask yourself these questions. What am I doing with my life? Does it have a purpose? Is it tight enough? A warrior accepts his destiny, whatever it may be. However, he fights to change things, and he makes something exquisite of his passage on earth. He tempers his will in such a way that nothing can deviate him from his purpose. Another of the people present raised his hand and asked how sorcerers are able to reconcile the principles of a warrior's way with their duties to society. He answered, "Sorcerers are free, and they don't accept social obligations. The responsibility is to oneself, not to others. Do you know why you were given the power of perception? Have you discovered what purpose your life serves? Will you cancel your animal destiny?" Those are sorcerers' questions, and the only ones that can seriously change anything. If you are interested in others, then answer that. A warrior knows that what gives sense to his life is the challenge of death, and death is a personal matter. It is a challenge for each one of us, and one which only sincere warriors accept. Seen from this point of view, the worries of ordinary people are just expressions of their egomania. Carlos insisted that we must not lose track of the fact that the commitment of a warrior is to what he called pure understanding, a state of being that arises from internal silence, and not to the transient attachments of the modality of the era in which he happens to live. He maintained that our social concerns are a description which has been implanted in us. It does not stem from a natural development of our consciousness. Rather, it is a product of a collective mind, of emotional disarray, feeling of fear and guilt, and a desire to lead others or be led. Modern man does not fight his own battles. Instead, he enters into extraneous wars that have nothing to do with the spirit. Naturally, a sorcerer is not moved by this. My teacher used to say that he didn't honor agreements made in his absence. I was not present when they decreed that I had to be an imbecile. He was born into particularly difficult circumstances, but he had the courage to become something more than just a human reaction to those circumstances. He affirmed that humanity's situation in general is horrendous, and to put emphasis on any particular group is just a covert form of racism. He used to repeat that in this world there are only two kinds of people, those who have energy and those who don't. He lived in a permanent fight against the blindness of his fellow men, yet he remained impeccable. He did not interfere with anybody. When I tried to explain my concern for people to him, he would point out my incipient double chin and tell me, "Don't deceive yourself, Carlitos. If the human condition seriously interested you, you would not treat yourself like a pig." He taught me that to feel pity for others is inappropriate for a warrior, because pity for others always stems from concern for the self. He used to ask me, pointing at people we met on our way, "Perhaps you believe yourself better than them." He helped me to understand that the solidarity of sorcerers towards the people around them comes from a supreme command, not from human sentiment. Mercilessly stalking my emotional reactions, he led me by the hand to the source of my preoccupations, and I was able to realize that my concern for people was a fraud. I was trying to escape from myself by transferring my problems to them. He showed me how compassion, in the sense we use the word, is a mental illness, a psychosis that will just make us more and more powerfully entangled in our ego. It was obvious that remembering Don Juan had moved Carlos. I could see how a wave of affection overwhelmed him. One of the people present raised his hand and commented that, in contrast to what Carlos was saying, compassion towards one's neighbor is the essential idea of all religions. He made a gesture of waving a fly away. Forget all that. Notions based on pity are a fraud. By the power of telling ourselves the same ideas over and over, we have substituted a genuine interest in man's spirit with cheap sentimentality. We have become professionals at compassion. And so what? Has it changed anything? When you feel the collective mind putting its pressure on you, trying to convince you to concentrate on the appearances of the world, repeat this crushing truth to yourself. I am going to die. I am not important. Nobody is. Knowing that is the only thing that counts. As an example of misplaced effort, he described the situation of a donkey caught in the mire. The more it moves, the more difficult things become. Its only way out is to act with coldness, try to relieve itself of the load on its back, and concentrate on the immediacy of its problem. The same thing happens to us. We are beings who are going to die. We are programmed to live like beasts, carrying loads of customs and other people's beliefs until the very end. But we can change all that. The freedom which the Warrior's Way offers us is within the reach of your hand. Take advantage of it. He told us how, while he was an apprentice, he had a problem. He was addicted to cigarettes. He had tried to quit several times, but without success. One day, Don Juan told me that we were going to collect plants in a desert area and that the trip would last several days. He told me, "You had better bring a whole carton of cigarettes, but make sure you wrap them very well because the desert is full of animals that might steal them." I thanked him for his consideration and carefully did as he suggested, but the following day, when I woke up in the middle of the chaparral, I discovered that the package had disappeared. I despaired. I knew that without cigarettes, I would soon begin to feel bad. Don Juan blamed the loss on a coyote and helped me to look for it. After hours of anguish, he finally found the tracks of the animal, which we'd followed for the rest of the day, going further and further into the mountains. When night arrived, he admitted to me that we were completely lost. Without cigarettes and without knowing where I was, I felt miserable. To console me, he assured me that there had been a town nearby, but it was just a matter of walking a little further and we would arrive someplace and be safe. But we spent the whole next day looking for a road, and then the next, and then another. We spent almost 2 weeks like this. A moment arrived when, almost dead from exhaustion, I let myself fall down in the sand and prepared to die. When he saw me in that state, he tried to cheer me up and make me keep going, asking, "Aren't you interested in smoking anymore?" I looked at him with rage, berated him for his incredible irresponsibility, and turning a deaf ear to him, I said that all I wanted was to die. "Very well," he replied with indifference. "Then we can go back now." We had been a few meters from the highway the whole time. The anecdote made the room explode with laughter. When we finally calmed down, Carlos remarked, "The tragedy of today's man is not his social condition, but the lack of will to change himself. It is very easy to design collective revolutions, but to genuinely change, to put an end to self-pity, to erase the ego, to abandon our habits and whims, that's something else entirely." Sorcerers say that true rebellion, and humanity's only way out as a species, is to stage a revolution against their own stupidity. As you can understand, this is a solitary work. The goal of sorcerers is the Sorcerers Revolution, the unrestricted unfolding of all our perceptual possibilities. I've never known a greater revolutionary than my teacher. He didn't just suggest changing tortillas for bread. Oh no, he went straight to the core of the matter. He proposed a deadly somersault of thought to the unknown, the release from all ties, and he demonstrated that it is possible. He suggested that I fill my life with decisions of power, with strategies which will bring me to awareness. He taught me that the order of the world doesn't have to be as we've been told, that I can toss it aside any time. I am not obligated to uphold an image before others or live in an inventory that doesn't suit me. My battlefield is the path of a warrior. When the meeting was over, all his listeners gathered to exchange a few words with him and say their farewells. When it was my turn, Carlos looked me up and down. Then he asked me to tell him my name and why I was there. I told him my name, and I explained that a friend, knowing my interest for the subject, had told me about this opportunity. His only comment was, "I want to talk to you in private." I was a little confused by his words, but waited until the end of his round of greetings and followed him to a corner of the room. There he invited me to have breakfast at his hotel the following day. I assured him that it would be my pleasure. He gave me the address and told me, "We'll meet tomorrow at 9 o'clock. He added that I should not tell anybody about our encounter and that I should be punctual.